All right, we're gonna get started. All right.
Thank you for coming to this week's colloquium. It's pretty depressing outside,
Yes.
so extra thanks. So today we have Professor Daniel Rivers from our Ohio State History Department, right? And Professor Rivers received his PhD from Stanford and undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley. That's right. His research focuses on Native American history, history of experiences of LGBTQ people in this country, history of family and sexuality, as well as social protest movements. Today, he's going to speak about, he's going to present some of his, part of his book, right? Yeah. Award-winning book, which was published by University of North Carolina. So we are particularly interested about your talk because, you know, what's going on right now in the political environment. So that makes the talk very, particularly informative for everybody here in Yale College. So welcome. And we have actually one historian in our faculty.
Yeah, that's true.
Back, you may ask you some questions. I'm looking forward to it. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks. And thanks for having me today, y'all. It's really a pleasure to be here. I was telling Alan that the first year I came here to OSU, I taught here in Page Hall, and it's nice to come back. I love the space. It's dear to me. So I want to start off by talking for just a second about my own childhood. I always tell people when they ask, and they asked me for my whole life, I was about what it was like growing up in a radical lesbian feminist community and household in the 1970s. I always tell them that my best friend Shem and I grew up in Shem's radical lesbian feminist household as well, that we grew up thinking about feeling allied with our mothers in the struggle that they were facing. We saw them experience misogyny, anti-lesbian aggression in the streets. We were told not to say the word lesbian around welfare officers, around police, around teachers. People were losing their kids around us. My mom's lover, Lucinda, was under threat of a pretty vicious lesbian custody case. So we certainly were educated about being part of a community that was under siege. And when we looked at the world around us and when we felt our own experiences, it affirmed that for us, right? We understood that. And so we were proud to be feminist sons of outspoken lesbian mothers. And as part of this experience, I think both Shem and I felt that we were at the forefront of a brave new world. It was an isolated world. It was the world that we called the straight world by the time we were 7 or so. Felt like it was through a glass darkly from our childhood. And we also felt that we must be the first children to grow up in non-heterosexual households. It certainly felt that way to us growing up. So that feeling of being at the edge of history and of being a bridge worker for as long as I can remember between my family and community and a larger society that often misunderstood us, set me on the path that led first to my graduate work at Stanford and then to the book that came from that work, Radical Relations, Lesbian Mothers, Gay Fathers, and the Children in the United States in World War II. But in the years of researching and writing the book, I learned that though my best friend and I had in fact been members of the first generation to grow up in openly lesbian households, lesbians and gay men had actually raised children for generations before us. Before the rise of lesbian and gay liberation movements, those parents stayed hidden out of fear of legal and social persecution. When large numbers of Americans began living openly as lesbians and gay men beginning in the late 1960s, gay fathers and lesbian mothers nationwide faced the loss of their children in custody courts because of their sexuality. The activism and media attention that these custody cases generated publicized the realities and possibilities of lesbian and gay parenthood to society in general, and to a generation of lesbians and gay men as well, driving the emergence, in fact, of underground insemination networks for lesbians by the mid-1970s, and the more widespread and well-known lesbian and gay baby boom of the 1980s and 1990s. And by the first decade of the 21st century, the demand for full domestic parental civil rights for all lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals had become a central focus of the mainstream LGBT freedom struggle. So in the first In the first 2 decades following the Second World War, many men and women who knew they were attracted primarily to the same sex chose to enter heterosexual marriages because they saw no other option. The media images and political voices of the 1950s emphasized a heterosexual, middle-class, nuclear family model of domesticity, in which women were homemakers and men were breadwinners. This strongly heterosexual culture alighted lesbians and gay men and rendered lesbian mothers and gay fathers completely invisible. In fact, mainstream society viewed same-sex sexuality and desire as antithetical to parenting, which was understood to be exclusively an outgrowth of heterosexual intimacy. At the same time, in the same period, there was a dramatic increase in the size and visibility of lesbian and gay communities. Lesbian and gay communities in major port cities such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York grew rapidly in the 1950s and 1960s, as men and women who came out to themselves while serving in the armed forces during World War II stayed in these metropolises instead of returning to their hometown. They joined men and women who had discovered their love for people of the same sex while working in the cities of the Northeast and the West as part of the war effort, and then helped infuse these cities with a diverse lesbian and gay culture. In a historical context that included both the growth of lesbian and gay communities and the strong emphasis on heterosexual domesticity in this period, many men and women who realized their same-sex orientation suppressed this information or chose to live double lives, often fueled by a desire to be parents and believing that this was impossible if they lived their lives exclusively as lesbians or gay men. All over the country, gay men and lesbians lived in fear that they would lose custody or even contact with their children if their sexuality became known. Many of these parents remained in heterosexual marriages while pursuing gay and lesbian relationships. There were risks involved in this choice. Gay men in the 1950s and 1960s were subject to frequent bar raids and being picked up on charges of lewdness and public indecency. Many of these men, when you look back through the arrest record, were married with children. And as these arrests were often made public, newspapers published complete lists of names of those arrested in bar raids, for instance. They could lose both their jobs and their marriages as a result. Men who decided to tell their spouses about their sexuality and left their marriages often faced complete separation and alienation from their children in this period. These fears were prevalent among both married and divorced lesbian mothers as well. Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, founders of the Daughters of Bilitis, the first lesbian civil rights organization in the United States, and themselves lesbian mothers, told me in an interview that lesbian mothers in the group were deeply afraid of losing custody of their children. As long as same-sex sexuality remained hidden, more lesbian mothers retained custody if their lesbianism wasn't known after leaving heterosexual marriages than did gay fathers because of a lingering tendency of family courts to favor mothers. But this was always predicated on keeping their sexual orientation a complete secret. These lesbian mothers who did raise their children outside of heterosexual marriage tended to live in the relative safety of bohemian working-class neighborhoods, such as the French Quarter in New Orleans, neighborhoods known for their cosmopolitan, free-thinking perspectives gave women some degree of anonymity. The growth of bohemian communities in the 50s and 60s allowed some lesbians to raise children in spaces partially removed from oppressive social norms that would otherwise have made their lives impossible. And to just give you an illustration of this, I'm going to show you some pictures and tell you the story of a woman named Blue Bunder. And I have these photos due to the incredible generosity of Blue's daughter, Linda, who I finally found about 10 years into the research down in Southern Florida, and drove down there from a postdoc at Emory in Atlanta and interviewed her for a couple of weeks. She was in her 60s when I did that. And she talked to me about growing up with her mom. So this is Blue Bunder and her daughter, Linda, in 1955. So what's happened here is that Blue, the first time she ever slept with a man, he was actually a client. She was doing sex work. As many women in tough working class butch femme communities, and Blue identified as a butch lesbian, many of these women, because society was so oppressive to them, engaged in informal economies, drug trade, sex work. And so Blue, through having sex with this man, got pregnant, and she gave birth to Linda in October of 1954. However, like so many generations of lesbian mothers and gay fathers that would come after Blue, Blue didn't believe that you could be a lesbian and a good mother at the same time. And so she gives Linda up in informal adoption to a heterosexual couple. And what's happened here is that Blue and her brother Tommy, they were very poor. They borrowed a brownie box camera, which was completely out of their budget. They borrowed one and they've gone out to the train yards in New Orleans to take photos because Blue believes this is the last time that she'll see her daughter, who was 1 year old at the time. This is Blue here, of course, on the left, with members of the Butch Femme community in the French Quarter. This is 1954. Blue was pregnant when the picture was taken. And these are more photos from that day. They were outside, so I had to take a photo scanner down with me in the trunk of my Tercel. And Linda let me scan in the photos. She was so kind. But they were these big brownie box camera negatives. So what happens is that in 1959, Blue learns that the heterosexual couple, heterosexuality being no guarantee of good parenting, have actually been involved in organized crime. And they've fallen into a very bad way. And they've given Linda back to Blue's stepmother. And Blue's stepmother had been abusive when Blue was growing up. And so she decides, with the encouragement of her lover Jeannie, pictured here, to go back and get Linda. So she goes back to New Orleans and she tells everyone that it was just a phase. I'm not a lesbian. A girl should be with her mother. And she takes Linda back to New York, where her and Jeannie raised Linda in the East Village, in what was actually a pretty sizable lesbian community that hasn't been documented yet in the East Village of New York. Greenwich Village, of course, is famous for its lesbian and gay community. And this is a family outing picture at Jones Beach in Long Island, circa 1960. What's interesting about this to me, and there's so much, these are compelling photographs, but one of the things that really stands out to me is that Jones Beach was kind of a tacit lesbian and gay beach, right? You have to imagine a time when things were known but not spoken. So that, here you have a lesbian family outing, and they actually go on this day with a couple of gay male friends too, to be at the beach and to have a nice day. But of course, they're under constant threat of punishment from the world around them. They could be perceived as lesbians with gay friends at any moment and taken away from Linda. They could be put in jail, right? So it was a life where you had to live on a very thin line, very vulnerable. These are other pictures during the 1960s of Blue and Linda. They're beautiful. Give us a window into this. So, this is Norma Jean Coleman and Beverly, her lover. They're a Butch Femme couple. We have this from a photo album, which is pretty much the only record that we have of these lives at the Lesbian Her Story Archives of Brooklyn. We know enough to know that this photo was taken in San Francisco in 1958. And about 6 months after this, the family relocates to Alaska, to Anchorage, where apparently there was a Butch Femme lesbian community. We don't have any of the material on that community, but and raise a child there. This is Bonita Jeffries standing with her daughter Ira. Ira's directly below Bonita, and Ira's girlfriend Snow Baby, who's to Ira's right. And this is Ira's 16th birthday in Harlem in 1948. And about 8 months before this, Ira has come out to Bonita around the kitchen table. And Ira has said, I like women, right? And Bonita says to her when she comes out, I know that, of course, I like women too. But you know what? We're Black, we're women, and we're lesbians, and they will kill us, right? So that was what happened when Ira comes out to her mom. But it's been a little while, and they're out for the birthday celebration, and things have mellowed out. But this gives us a window into Black Butch Femme, or Stud Femme, as Butch Femme was sometimes articulated in African American communities in a family in 1948. All right, So as repressive and uncertain as these decades were for lesbian mothers, gay fathers, and their children, they also saw the beginnings of lesbian and gay parental organizing. I'm talking here about the pre-Stonewall period. Unlike the lesbian mother and gay father groups that would form in the era of gay liberation and lesbian feminism when I was growing up, these early organizing attempts were not aimed at changing the legal status of lesbian and gay parents in the custody. Custody cases in this era were rare, and when they did occur, I found 3, just scouring for years, were totally tragic. It was unthinkable in this period that the law recognized lesbian and gay parents. Direct action for lesbian and gay parental rights would begin only after the emergence of a militant ethos of lesbian and gay pride in the late 1960s. In the pre-liberation post-war era, however, lesbian mothers did form support groups to talk about how they could be good parents and to assure each other that their lesbianism would not harm their children. And in the same moment, some gay men in what we call the homophile movement, which was this early lesbian and gay civil rights movement in these decades, also began to discuss the right to become adoptive parents. So the experiences of lesbian mothers and gay fathers in the late 1960s and 70s show us that the vision of post-war lesbian and gay parents had in fact been very well founded. In November of 1967, a woman named Ellen Nadler loses custody of her 5-year-old daughter because the judge hearing her case felt her lesbianism was not in the best interest of her child. And this was in Sacramento in '67. Ellen Nadler's case marked the beginning of a 15 years of large numbers of lesbian mother and gay father custody cases. In the 1970s, as more and more lesbians and gay men with children openly declared their sexuality in the context of gay liberation, they exposed and then challenged the long-standing cultural assumption that lesbians and gay men could not be parents. The growing visibility of gay and lesbian communities, in fact, increased the risk of custody loss for even those lesbian and gay parents who did not choose to come out publicly. In the 18 years between 1967 and 1985, lesbian and gay parents lost many more court battles than they won, but a shift was noticeable by 1985 as an increasing number of state courts began overturning decisions that had denied lesbian mothers and gay fathers custody and visitation rights solely on the basis of their homosexuality. The majority of cases from 67 to 85 involved men and women who had left previous heterosexual marriages. Gay fathers usually fought for visitation rights, while lesbians fought for either visitation or outright custody. Gay fathers were often estranged from their children for years as a result of court orders secured by ex-wives or other family members. Both lesbian mothers and gay fathers lost custodial rights regularly, and even when they were allowed to spend time with their children, they often did so at the expense of their constitutional right of association. This took the form of prohibitions against being with their children while in the presence of their same-sex partners at lesbian and gay political or social events, or in the company of any other lesbians or gay men, totally. So by the mid-19th, so this is Mary Jo Risher in the most famous lesbian mother custody case of the era, leaving the courtroom after losing custody of her son in Texas in 1875. Risher would file appeal after appeal up through 1978, but never gained custody of her son back. And one of the reasons given for taking Risher's son away from her was that she had allowed him to wear a YWCA shirt and had therefore inculcated improper gender understandings in her son that would lead to his confusion and mental illness. This is Jeannie Julian. Jeannie Julian fought another famous custody case in the San Francisco Bay Area. So by the mid-1970s, dissenting views in the psychological and medical professions regarding same-sex sexuality began to pave the way for changes to come. In 1974, as a result of the organizing of lesbian and gay professionals and activists, the American Psychological Association voted to remove homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. Throughout the 1970s, a number of well-known professionals served as expert witnesses in favor of lesbian mother and gay father custodial rights, and this definitely was a part of a shift. In addition, an increasing number of local lesbian or gay practitioners emerged in regions where significant lesbian and gay communities, so psychologists and psychiatrists, emerged in these communities such as San Francisco and New York. So this growth in sympathetic professional opinions, both psychiatric and legal, and the chance it offered to present expert witnesses in the courtroom was a crucial component of the slow change in the judicial bias against lesbian and gay parents. But the most critical element of change in these years was the grassroots lesbian mother and gay father organizations that sprang up across the country. So these groups constitute a previously overlooked part of the lesbian and gay civil rights movement, the women's movement, and reproductive rights movement. They emerged in various forms, driven fundamentally by the struggle for parental rights in the custody courts. But along the way, activists developed a broad network dedicated to exposing the racist, sexist, and homophobic foundations of the concept of the Northern family. In 1971, the first lesbian mother advocacy group, the Lesbian Mothers Union, was formed in the San Francisco Bay Area. And here, this is a flyer for an LMU benefit in '73. This is the Lesbian Mothers Union picnic in Berkeley that same year. And this actually, I mean, this picture is very dear to me, very powerful. So I lost him in 1995. He died up on the side of Everest. And certainly my work is in honor of him, and I miss him every day. This is a picture of my best friend Shem and his sister Mayaka and their parents, Jasmine and Morgan, at a Jeannie Julian rally for her custody case. You can see Jeannie Julian here. Harvey Milk is behind the two women talking to Jeannie. And this was a rally set up by the Lesbian Mothers. There's a man at a rally, at the same rally in San Francisco in '77 from Laney College. These are marches in the San Francisco Freedom Day Parade in '78. You can sort of see lesbian mother rights emerging as a powerful issue within the lesbian feminist community. So the Lesbian Mothers Union was joined by other groups, both large and small, in Seattle, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Ann Arbor, Dallas, New York City. Lesbian custody activism encompassed both large urban centers, where sizable lesbian and gay communities often existed, and more rural areas where lesbian mothers fighting for custody had limited community assistance. Often single case defense funds, and this is a flyer for a Mary Jo Risher benefit in Huntington to New York, they would organize around a particular custody case and would then connect with the larger nationwide network of lesbian mother activists to share information and resources. These are members of the Lesbian Defense Fund in Essex County, Vermont. These women were also part of a radical lesbian feminist commune that the LDF operated out of in Vermont, and they're announcing their custody victory on stage at the Michigan Women's Music Festival in 1977. So I want to turn in detail now to one of these lesbian mother groups, the New York-based group Dykes and Tykes. Dykes and Tykes was founded in 1976 by, among others, women who had been instrumental in the homophile movement of the 1960s that I mentioned. It began as both a social network for lesbian mothers and their children, as well as an organization committed to political action on behalf of lesbian mothers fighting for custody. This is one of the primary graphics that Dykes and Tykes used in its newsletters. I think it offers a multiracial vision of lesbian motherhood. It also shows a commitment to addressing both lesbians raising daughters and lesbians raising sons. This is important, since lesbian mothers of sons often expressed feeling elided in lesbian feminist communities and were the subject of heated debates related to the presence of boy children. This is another graphic that Dykes and Tykes used often. This one evokes a sense of maternal care and possibly even flight. I did have the great honor of interviewing a few lesbian mothers who went underground because their ex-husbands were police officers or judges, and they felt that there was no way they would ever be able to remain in contact with their children. And I interviewed a woman who kept a safe house up on the Canadian border and would regularly have women come in the night with papers that they were going to hope to go across the border into Canada and go underground with. And I think that we see that here, that sense of flight. By 1978, Dykes and Tykes was actively protesting and drawing links between the anti-affirmative Bakke decision, attacks on welfare rights, and the forced sterilization of women of color, calling for a living wage, state-subsidized childcare, and universal health care. Dykes and Tykes was part of a larger coalitional movement for women's liberation that held the struggles of family against poverty, racism, sexism, and homophobia at the core of its political agenda. The group, like most other lesbian mother activist groups, was also committed to developing social outlets and discussion groups for lesbian mothers and their children, interrogating cultural assumptions of lesbian childlessness, trying to ease the social alienation of lesbian mothers, and addressing the erasure of lesbian mothers raising sons in lesbian feminist communities. So Dykes and Tykes was founded, as I said, in 1976. It was the vision of this woman, Carol Morgan. Carol came out of New Jersey, DOB, Daughters of Bilitis, joined them in the late 1960s. And Carol had been thinking since this time here in 69, she told me, we sat and talked for weeks about lesbian mother activism, about the needs of lesbian mothers to organize and to fight for their rights. Carol was in a situation where she didn't have to worry about custody loss. Often you'll see the founders of these organizations were women who didn't have to worry about custody loss, so that they could be more public and more active than other members of the group. This is Carol in 1971 at what we might call First Pride. This is Second Pride, sorry. This is the second annual Christopher Street Liberation Day March in celebration and commemoration of the Stonewall riots in June of 1969. And Carol marches in Second Pride here with this sign that says, "Mothers of the world, come out." However, she told me that in these early years, very few mothers were willing to actually join her in this. It was just too terrifying. So it'll take until 1976 for Carol to found Dykes and Tykes and get the work on. This is the Dykes and Tykes button from Carol's collection. And I just show you this really quick, just for us to think about the resonances of the political activism here that we're looking at. A no on 6, no on the Briggs Amendment that would have banned lesbian and gay teachers from California schools. Wonder Woman, of course, a great feminist and lesbian feminist icon. Up there at the top is the labrist, the gold labrist with the Star of David. Carol identified as a proud Jewish lesbian feminist. The labrist is the battle axe of the Amazons, for those of you who don't know. So that gives us a kind of sense of the political moment that Dykes and Tykes was emerging. These are cartoons from a periodical called Atalanta, and Atalanta was published by the Atlanta Lesbian Feminist Alliance, or ALPHA, which was the sort of clearinghouse organization for lesbian feminist activism in the South in the 1970s. And you can see here in this cartoon sort of some of the lived experience social history that I'm talking about here. So it says, "But mom, if there's nothing wrong with your being a lesbian, why can't I tell my friends?" Of course, why you can't tell his friends is because of the fear of custody loss. This is another issue of Atalanta, right, testifying to the fact that lesbian mother struggles was an issue that came up often in the periodical. But this is a cover dedicated to lesbian mothers everywhere and their children. Of course, like so many depictions of lesbian mother-headed families and gay father-headed families, the use of two parents threatens to erase single lesbian mother families like the one I grew up in, right? And you know, we often see a kind of lesbian and gay family politic that is a politics of normativity, right? Where the lesbian and gay parents presented are white, there's two parents, right? Not bi and trans parents. So I think it's always important to sort of interrogate the stakes in these kind of representations. But we certainly see that this was a deep issue for Atlanta Lesbian Feminist Alliance. So I want to talk here a little bit about gay fathers. So a history of gay father groups in this same period and the influence they had on mainstream gay and lesbian politics can help us understand ways that they and lesbian and other activist groups affected the later development of a mainstream LGBT family and marriage politics, which is where we find ourselves today, as well as bring other aspects of the historical intersection of gender, race, and sexuality into focus. So I told you that an earlier generation of married gay fathers had experienced only two options: either live double lives as married gay men or leave their children altogether. But by the late 1970s and 1980s, many gay fathers had organized to protect their rights as parents and support each other in this effort. Gay father groups formed nationwide in some of the very cities that spawned gay liberation: San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Diego, Boston. There is evidence, as you can see here from the cover of the Gay Liberator in Detroit, of a radical politics of gay fatherhood in the early and mid 1970s, connected to the politics of gay liberation. And gay father groups in San Francisco and New York seem to have been founded at least partly in a counterculture milieu. However, these groups were quickly transformed by larger changes affecting gay male neighborhoods in the mid 1970s. As men came out about their sexuality across the country, they migrated to gay enclaves like the Castro, Greenwich Village, West Hollywood. These migrations brought new perspectives and modified the revolutionary gay liberationist ethic that had been prevalent in these spaces. Many men who identified as gay fathers and joined gay father groups had in fact come out of middle-class heterosexual marriages in this period. And by the height of their emergence in the early 1980s, most gay father groups were largely made up of middle-class white professional men. In this period, the presence of gay father groups in gay communities was seen by some members as an important countermeasure to the visibility of highly sexualized aspects of gay life that they saw as making the gay community particularly vulnerable to attacks by the conservative right. In 1985, the president of San Francisco Gay Fathers, Bill Jones, remembered seeing gay fathers marching in 1975, and this mitigating his discomfort at the, and here I quote from Bill, sleaziness of the overdone drag queens and the pickup trucks loaded down with obscene signs, bare ends, and toilet bowls. We do make a powerful statement, he went on to say, with our numbers, our clean-cut look, and most of all with the wonderful faces of our kids who look happy and well cared for. For Jones, looking back, gay fathers of San Francisco were an important representation of the respectability of the gay community in the city. And I think this politics of respectability or politics of normality, right, has to be seen in gay fathers' activism of this period and interrogated historically for its impact on the LGBT freedom struggle in general. Now, I have these pictures courtesy of Bill, who I chatted with for quite a few times. He was super kind. This is members of SF Bay Area Gay Fathers in 1980 at the Freedom Day Parade. These pictures are very poignant and tragic for me because, of course, the next year the CDC would publish in its morbidity and mortality weekly reports the reports of early cases of Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis carinii in populations of gay men in San Francisco and New York, signaling the onset of the horror of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And Randy Schultz, who was one of the chroniclers of that which would kill him, talked about the 1980 Freedom Day Parade and said that unbeknownst to everyone, death walked among us. So that always sort of leaps out to me when I look at these beautiful pictures. So, like members of the San Francisco Gay Fathers, men in other gay father groups of the era expressed a belief that their children gave pride parades a sense of respectability that stood against anti-gay prejudice. These perspectives coincided with the fact that by the 1980s, many men in the gay father movement, as I said, were white, upper middle class professionals and turned away from a more radical anti-capitalist, anti-racist gay politics of the previous decade. So their understanding, I would argue that their understanding of gay fatherhood was definitely political. It highlighted the idea that gay fathers could be good fathers and constructed a vision of family values, quote unquote, that could serve as a political counterpoint to the increasingly anti-gay politics of the Reagan era. However, it was a mainstream single issue politics in contrast to the radical intersectional politics of Dykes and Tykes. Later political campaigns for gay and lesbian parental rights and for same-sex marriage would inherit this politics of respectability from a gay fathers movement across the country that had much more capital and institutional resources than the grassroots lesbian mother organizations. So here's Gay Fathers of Los Angeles flyer. You can certainly see the kind of way it's portraying a gay family of normalcy here, a white businessman, a gay father. This is San Francisco Bay Area Gay Fathers newsletter from 1985. I mean, I don't know, as a child of radical lesbian feminists, I almost feel like I don't even need to explain that no lesbian mother activist group would ever have the American flag as its banner. There you go. So, Gay Fathers Forum of Greater New York, we can see in this also this two gay father sort of icon up here by Gay Fathers Forum. Again, this notion of a normal family that's just like every other. So, let's see. This is the Gay Fathers Forum newsletter from New York. We can see the emerging support. This is 84 of organizations like the National Organization for Women in supporting gay fathers in custody cases, right? So custody cases are starting to get national notoriety. All right. So I think what we see here is that lesbian mother and gay father groups, as they emerged, were very different in terms of politics, community interaction, racial and class makeup, and the ways that gender affected the coming out experiences of members. For example, gay men with children had much more contact with ex-wives, even remaining married for some time, which is in stark contrast with lesbian mother activists who were deeply involved in lesbian nationalist communities and rarely discussed ex-husbands except as possible adversaries in custody struggles. Also, middle-class gay men who had been married had more financial privilege than even middle-class lesbian mothers, since these women had given up the financial security of their husbands, sometimes even foregoing child support in order to avoid custody struggles. And as women, they often labored for lower pay than men in similar jobs, or had to seek out job training if they had primarily been homemakers. But at the same time, both of these nationwide movements grew out of a common historical moment, the emerging visibility of lesbian mothers and gay fathers after an earlier era of hiding and the onset of waves of custody cases that were fought across the country. So by the mid-1980s, gay father groups were devastated also by the onslaught of the AIDS epidemic. Bill Jones of San Francisco Gay Fathers remembers this period as an awful time when the healthy members of SFGF became caretakers of the members who were dying. By the late 1980s, Jones was conducting burials at sea free of charge for members who had died of AIDS. And after 28 such memorials for gay fathers from the group, Jones sold his boat, having lost all joy in it, as he told me. I found one of the remaining survivors of Gay Fathers of Los Angeles out in the desert in Southern California, and sobbing, he brought me the Rolodex that he kept for the members of the group. And he showed me that every time somebody died of AIDS, he would turn the card around and 90% of the cards were facing the way that would indicate that they had died. I think we're looking at about 80 to 90% death rate, which also correlates with the death rates in the community in places like the Castro as the epidemic hits in the 1980s. But by this time, gay fathers groups were also part of a strong network of organizations led by an umbrella organization called Gay Parents Coalition International, which represented the political coalescence of this gay father movement. The group was formed in 1979 at the first National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights by representatives of gay father groups in Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C. By its third meeting in November of 1980, the coalition included groups from at least 10 other gay father groups across the country and from Toronto. Throughout the 1980s, GPCI provided support and advice to existing gay fathers groups and helped new ones to get started. GLPCI was among several other large lesbian and gay civil rights organizations that helped to focus the LGBT freedom struggle towards domestic and familial rights in this period. In the late 1980s and 1990s, the National Gay Task Force was increasingly expanding an early focus on the rights of lesbian mothers and gay fathers, along with Lambda Legal and the Lesbian Rights Project, which had emerged from the same roots as the lesbian mother groups of the 1970s. These groups were an expression of the lived experience of a generation of lesbian mothers and gay fathers who had come from previous heterosexual marriages, lived in fear of custody loss, and argued for the right to be parents. The Lesbian Rights Project, which eventually changed its name to the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and I have my NCLR umbrella here in my computer bag, grew to be one of the most important legal organizations in the LGBT civil rights movement, with an annual budget in 2012 of $4 million. The work of the Lesbian Rights Project was an important part of a transition that I argued for from radical lesbian mother groups that were involved in grassroots activism out of feminist lesbian nationalist communities to large-scale political activism at the national level. The LRP had been working on lesbian parenting cases since its founding in 1977 and had served as a legal counsel on the first donor paternity cases, co-parent custody visitation cases, and second parent adoption in the 1980s. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force all worked with NCLR in its focus on lesbian and gay parenting issues and domestic rights. In 1989, the task force inaugurated its Lesbian and Gay Families Project under the leadership of Ivy Young as a joint effort with the National Center for Lesbian Rights. The task force initiative combined a focus on gay and lesbian parenting rights with work on domestic partnership, employment, and insurance benefits, and the right for lesbians and gay men to be involved in medical and legal decisions about their partner. In the early 1990s, this project lobbied for the passage of domestic partner benefits at the municipal and state level and fought existing laws prohibiting gay adoption in states such as Florida and New Hampshire. At the time of the Families Project's founding, only a handful of cities in the United States had some form of domestic partnership legislation in place. The most brutal period of lesbian and gay custody struggles in the early years of the AIDS epidemic, where many people with AIDS had been denied the most basic rights of family and association, were in the immediate past and served as important motivators for the project's founding. The work of the Families Project brought together veterans of both lesbian mother and gay father activism and represented an increasing focus on domestic and family rights in the larger LGBT freedom struggle. On March 1st, 1990, a special commission held hearings on the feasibility of enacting domestic partner legislation for the District of Columbia. Ivy Young spoke as head of the Families Project and urged the commission to follow the lead of family diversity commissions in cities such as Los Angeles and San Francisco in calling for inclusive domestic partner benefit programs. She spoke of the lack of legal recognition for diverse intergenerational lesbian and gay households with and without children, discrimination faced by gay and lesbian parents, and the need for equitable hospital visitation and healthcare policies. These hearings illustrate the growing centrality of domestic and family issues to the LGBT freedom struggle and the direct impact that the history of gay and lesbian parental activism, embodied in groups such as the NCLR and Gay and Lesbian Parents Coalition International, had on these changes. In the late 1980s, domestic partner legislation was the primary focus of this political organizing, but it was quickly superseded by a growing movement for same-sex marriage, beginning in 1993, when a Hawaii Supreme Court decision quickly opened up the possibility of same-sex marriage reform. Over the next 2 decades, as the debate over marriage equality moved increasingly into the public eye, children of gay men and lesbians would emerge as important symbols and spokespersons, right? The way I argue that for decades and decades, us kids of, as I call us, have acted as bridge workers, directly challenging the notion, prevalent, at least here, I hope I've demonstrated since the 1950s, that gay men and lesbians could not be good parents and were in fact antithetical to the notion of family. So the visible increase in lesbian and gay parents of the 1980s and 1990s. And here we have the demands of the '79 March in Washington for lesbian and gay civil rights. And you can see fourth in the list is indiscrimination in lesbian mother and gay father custody cases. So the visible increase in lesbian and gay parents of the 80s and 90s that the media called the gay and lesbian baby boom actually had its roots in the decades of lesbian and gay families with children who had come before them. By defying a fundamental cultural perception of the family as an exclusively heterosexual institution, gay fathers and lesbian mothers in those early decades after World War II opened the possibilities for lesbians and gay men to choose to become parents and raise children in openly non-heterosexual environments. Unlike the radical resistance families that emerged in lesbian feminist communities of the 1970s, this new generation of gay and lesbian-headed households challenged the heterosexual assumption of American culture by demanding inclusion in ordinary and mainstream ways, as lesbian mothers and gay fathers sat in hospital maternity wards, shopped for preschools and daycare centers for their children, and inspired the production of books and summer camps aimed at their families. They drove a shift toward family and domestic advocacy in the LGBT rights movement, and fundamentally challenged the assumption in American society that the family was, by its very definition, heterosexual. In doing so, however, they were building on networks, legal concepts, and social changes laid by the generations before them. In the same way, national advocacy groups struggling for legal changes in the area of domestic and marital rights grew out of an earlier grassroots organizational history in which the radical politics of lesbian mother groups fused with the politics of a gay family respectability that came from gay fathers groups to shape the direction of the modern LGBT freedom struggle. Thanks, Don. Really kind.
Questions, comments?
Yes, so I skipped a few pages. I wanted to have a chance to
Yeah.
interrogate you. Yes, please.
Well, it's just a comment. I have not seen a presentation like this in decades. We're so used to, I'm an historian of origin, right? My master's, my PhD is in PA.
Yeah.
But the presentations that I've seen way back then are a storyline that you slowly unfold, right? It's a very unusual in the social science context, and I ask my colleagues here, we're so used to, here's the conclusion up front. Oh, and this was the question, and here's the literature review, there's the methods, here's the stats, and then the conclusion comes again. So I find that kind of refreshing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I was wondering about your sources. You relied a lot on photographs and on pamphlets and interviews, right?
So,
Is it too close to judge the impact of these changes between the 50s and the 2020s?
yeah, I mean, I think so. First, the archival question. It's such a good question. So I worked from archives across the country, the Lesbian Her Story Archives, the greatest lesbian archives in the world in Brooklyn, New York, the San Francisco GLBT Historical Society, One Institute in Archives in Los Angeles. I did, for this, I've done over 240 oral histories. I think for the book here, I was probably up to about 120 over a period of 10 years. And often people who, like Carol, who were participants in this, would not only have a wonderful conversation with me, but they would open up boxes of primary documents that I then would take with a digital camera that was probably not as good as my phone that I have now, right? In a motel room close by, I would photograph so I could return them to them. And that was amazing. I find as a social historian that different sources do different things well. So that the first oral history that I ever did was with Jeannie Julian, who lost custody of her children in 1977. And it was a real trial by fire because I sat with Jeannie in her apartment in Oakland and we talked for hours and hours. And every hour or so she would sob and just say, I have to take 15 minutes. And she would just cry on the couch. And I, of course, every time said, we need to do this later. And she would say, no, I need to do this now because I've been needing to do this forever. So interviews with individuals gave me a vision of what it was like to sit in a custody court and to be asked to give graphic details of what you do in bed, right? And to be told that you must have sex with your lovers in front of the kids if you're a lesbian, and to have your children taken, I mean, all over the country, the same, in family courts, which are not connected. Anyway, no time for that. But, and so I did legal history at Stanford for about 5 years too, and traced them all back, learned to do legal history. But so an interview like the one with Jeannie gave me a vision into the history of affect, which is such a clinical term, right? The history of emotion, what it felt like for these individuals. But when you ask people about when this org was founded or when this happened, invariably you get different answers from different people. And so the paper record is invaluable. So I really like a methodology that puts them together. Now, you know.
Was it difficult for people to talk?
very. But to their great honor, I had one interview that just didn't happen. It was a woman who lost her kids outright, no parental rights, in a very brutal custody case in the late 70s in upstate New York. And every summer when I was in New York City, working for months at the LHA in Brooklyn, I would call this woman. I think I called her for about 3 years. And every time we talked, every summer, she would say, I want to do this so bad. It's so important, but I just can't right now. I can't. And by the 3rd year, I had to realize that this woman, it wasn't in her to be able to do it. It was too intense what she'd gone through. And as I felt that, I just said, thank you very much. And I didn't end up interviewing her. But so many of my participants cried and went through all the anguish of what it was like for them and the joys of the lives that they're going through. It's a very powerful thing. It's very humbling. In terms of the implications, historically, I think we are pretty close, but we can see how Obergefell has already changed things, right? So Obergefell in 2015, of course, gives the Supreme Court's approval for same-sex marriage. And in the Obergefell decision, Kennedy talks in a couple of places about about families with children, about lesbian and gay families with children, providing a legal connective tissue back to Bowers v. Hardwick, which I was 16 years old in my community. We loathed that decision, right? It upheld the sodomy laws. Byron White, in the majority decision in that anti-gay case, says no connection between family and homosexuality has ever been demonstrated. I was 16 years old growing up in my lesbian household, right? So Bowers, but then when we look at Obergefell, that long trajectory that hopefully moves sexual orientation and gender identity towards inclusion in the 14th Amendment, we can hope, that trajectory at every point is articulated around either conceiving of same-sex sexual orientation as antithetical to family or as linked with it, right? And in terms of custody cases themselves, we had a 2018 moment in which the US Supreme Court declined to review an Arizona Supreme Court case that had said that based on Obergefell, a lesbian mother who was the biological mother and was challenging the custody of a child she had had while married with a woman who was the non-biological partner. I didn't have time to go into that. Those cases emerged in the early 80s. These cases were some lesbian mothers who were biological moms chose to disavow and take their relationship and take custody away from the non-bio moms who were very vulnerable. But in this case, the US Supreme Court said that they would not review the Arizona Supreme Court decision, which had said you can't do that because based on Obergefell, the biological mother could not do that, right? So what we see so far is that marriage and family are deeply intertwined, as we all know, and that Obergefell has indeed ended this era of custody cases. But I do think we gotta take a moment.
There's a question online from Ethan. Ethan, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. Ethan? Oh,
Yeah,
there.
sorry. I really just wanted to ask about the influence of the DSM and how that terminology in that diagnostic tool was used to prevent queer parents from parenting. Thank you.
Huge. Thanks so much for your question, Ethan. I mean, the sea change that occurs as expert witnesses like Dr. Richard Green, who also is an important part of trans history in other ways. Green emerges as a part of the clinics for gender affirmation surgery's availability in the 1960s. By 1975, Green is actually testifying as an expert witness in lesbian mother custody cases. And that had everything to do with the change in the DSM, right? As homosexuality was taken off the list of mental illnesses, it enabled practitioners to be able to sit in court and to say that these individuals were not mentally ill. And also in tandem, we slowly see the change of sex laws. Now, although Bowers v. Hardwick would affirm the sodomy laws, and in 2003, when the Supreme Court finally overturns them, 14 states and Puerto Rico still have them in place. Some of them are rewritten to be only about homosexuality. We do see state by state a change. California revoked its sodomy law, its sex law in 1975. So it's really a double thing that happens because the point is that if you can criminalize somebody in the court for just admitting they're a lesbian or a gay man because they're admitting that they break the law of the state, then you can take a kid away for that. They're an admitted criminal. If you can say that just based on somebody saying that they're a lesbian or a gay man, they're by definition mentally ill, you can take a child away from that, right? So both of these things have a deep effect. Thanks you.
I was gonna echo what Yo said. This was my favorite, this is my 5th year here, and I'm a student. This was my favorite, colloquium so far. So thank you so much for your talk. I'm really interested if you have any thoughts, if there's any history about like bi erasure, like there's the whole, I'll just leave it there.
So bi history is the hardest of lesbian, gay, bi, and trans history. It remains the hardest. We only have about 5 books on trans history. But bi history is deeply difficult because of biphobia as it emerges in the generation that I grew up in. Bi activism is really strong and prevalent. The Bi People Center was founded in 1976 in San Francisco, and it was a powerful bi political movement. But biphobia and the notion that bisexual individuals is super complicated, but we're just in denial of their lesbianism or their gayness, right? And all other kinds of really abhorrent biphobia and erasure operated in such a way so that it's very difficult to piece together a history, although we're just beginning to get it. In terms of bi custody cases and bi families, I did interview a man who started an early gay and lesbian parenting organization in 1976, A. Billy S. Jones, who would go on to become a really important African-American LGBT activist, worked on the March on Washington in '79, it's pretty famous. And we chatted about the parents group, and he talked about how he called himself a gay father, knowing that he was a bisexual man from '76 up through the mid-1980s, right? And that caused difficulties not only for himself and his heart and his ability to speak himself, but difficulties with his daughter Peaches, because she felt that he was communicating something that wasn't true to what she saw in him, right? So that's the bit I have on the experiences of bisexual individuals in the activist group, which is not much. Pretty quickly into the dissertation, my amazing mentor, Estelle Friedman, who taught everything good in my life happened to be because of Estelle, said, you probably are going to need to cut bi and trans parents, because this is going to actually take you until you're like 70, right? Because this is the first history of all of us, right? And it was like a lot. So bi and trans family history is deeply important. Trans history is a little bit more accessible. So that, for instance, I did do a year of work on trans parent custody cases. And that was part of the reason that I decided in the end to just do lesbian and gay parents and their kids. Because trans parent custody cases were compellingly similar to, but also really different from gay and lesbian custody cases. They were similar in the horrible punitive aspect of the family courts, but the ways that they articulated transphobia and kind of gender panic and other kinds of notions were different. And so, I mean, I say in the footnotes, please, somebody do the work. It's really important. So anyway, it's a little bit, thanks, it's a great question. Yeah, please.
I have a think for this,
Pleasure.
more of a methodological question. When you're doing your oral histories, and maybe this changed over time, how much did you reveal about your own history and what was behind that decision?
Such a great question. So as a child of radical lesbian feminist community, part of the question is how we gain access. I gained access to have conversations that would have been very difficult otherwise. I'm also a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I was raised in a radical lesbian feminist native household. And that has gained me access in other conversations, right? Who we are, we bring to the conversation. So there is always that, of course. But the question you asked is something that I learned over the years. So in my first oral histories, it was like this. I was like, oh yeah, me too. And this happened with my mom, right? And I'd be listening to the digital tape later and I'd be like, shut up, you know? That person was about to say something really crucial. I know what happened to you. And I think part of that was my feeling of connection with my participants and this history that we were exploring together. By the end of a decade of oral histories, I almost never talked because I felt like, you know what, we are here to do this work, and those bonds can happen just simply by our shared commitment to the work. And I have to, in my actions, enact the fact that their story is the most critical part of this, right? So that did change over time. I was really young when I started.
One last question, Erin.
Please.
I'm thinking about our students, and in the Glenn College, we have a lot of students that want to make change and be a part of social movements.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could share one or two things that you think we can most learn from these groups about how to make change in our movements today.
Absolutely. So it's a great question. I would say that the larger argument that I want to make here is that the family, as I say here, has in American history been encoded as, to use a jargony critical theory phrase, always already heterosexual, that it is by assumption heterosexual at the outset. And to understand how deep this code is, you have to realize that not only did this lead to assumptions of gay and lesbian childlessness on the part of mainstream society, but also assumptions of queer childlessness on the part of LGBT communities, right? So that lesbian mothers and gay fathers often had to struggle against people within lesbian and gay communities who thought that they were an impossibility. That code imbues our society, but even then, it's only a part of a larger picture. And if we look at American homophobia as a structural system, right? Because before I came to history, I did graduate work in critical theory, French and German philosophy, and I love French structuralism. And that French structuralist notion of embeddedness, right, I think is really valuable. And we can always look at hate systems as if they're this sort of deep structural embedded system of meaning, right? And if we think about American homophobia, I would argue that one of its fundamental pillars is the antithesticalness of children from same-sex orientation. And we can see this if we think about the Anita Bryant Save Our Children campaign, which launches an era of moral majority anti-gay panic in 1977, 78 in Dade County. We can think about this if we think about attacks on lesbian and gay, bi and trans teachers that have existed for decades and decades in American society. The attacks on gay and lesbian custody rights. All of these notions are linked, and it's not that hard to understand. They're linked by this demand that childhood and children be severed always, be distanced from same-sex sexual orientation and non-normative gender identity. And so what this leads us to, I think it should lead us to, is to be suspicious when we read these newspaper articles for the last 2 years about these cries of child protectionism around so-called family rights, around the rights of trans children and their families to have healthcare, in transitional healthcare, right? We should be suspicious when we see yet another wave of lesbian and gay teachers in threat of losing their jobs, right? There's been a couple of cases in the last couple of years where one woman just showed a picture of her and her wife to her class, her elementary school class, and she lost her job, right? So we see again that part of American homophobia and transphobia is this notion of child protectionism, right? And I always tell my students, let's just cut to the chase, right? Do you think that if we were in a 4th grade classroom and everyone was giving out Valentines, you remember when we all did that when we were in elementary school, and Tommy has a Valentine for Fred, right? Do you think that's not an issue? Right, of course that's an issue. And until we get to a place where the emergence in a life of same-sex orientation and object choice is of no consequence, then we're just beginning to struggle against it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you again. It's here at OSU, so he's here for you to continue to talk with.
Absolutely. Always.
Yeah.
Email me. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
But it's mostly the South Asian blood that I have.